Well, welcome everyone to our Bible study, More Than a Shepherd. Today's already the sixth session of this Bible study. Yes, and today we're doing the Bible study on 2 Samuel chapter 6. Now, last week we talked about the previous chapter. We talked about 2 Samuel 5, right? And last week we kind of saw the turning point in David's life, probably, and definitely in his work as king, as ruler of sorts. So, because until last week, right, he was kind of the ruler over Judah, it was still sort of a tribal reality for David. There were still skirmishes that he had to be worried about from other tribes that he kind of had to battle. Last week, that kind of was put to an end because he kind of reunited Israel and Judah and made it, and established a really big kingdom, if you remember. He even had trade relations with the king from far up north, from Tyre, who kind of brought him some cedar wood and craftsmen to build his palace up really, in a very nice fashion, I think, in a way that kind of didn't work before. He conquered Jerusalem, right? Made that the capital, and he beat the Philistines. So basically all those things that have been really a big deal, I think, up until this point, right? Beating the Philistines. How is the relationship between the people of God? What's going to be the capital? All of those stories kind of come to an end here. It is settled. Jerusalem is the capital, and the Philistines are kind of out of the picture from now on, right? And the people of God are reunited. All of those things kind of came together in 2 Samuel 5. And David actually probably becomes the second Israelite to have a really good track record against the Philistines. Do you know who the other one was? This is a mean question. This is tough. I'm going to be honest. This is really hard. So don't be afraid to just guess into the book. Okay. The first one is the Ark of the Covenant. That was. I told you it was mean. What do you know about the Ark of the Covenant? Does anyone know anything about the Ark of the Covenant?
It was layered.
It was layered. Okay. How was it layered?
I think it was definitely layered in gold, but I think
Yes.
it was also
Yes.
wood.
Yes. That's right. It was acacia wood and it was gold plated, basically. It was covered in.
If you looked at it, you turned to dust.
Not quite.
From the movie.
Not quite. We're getting to that part today as well. Yes. So you're right, Doug. It was layered. It was basically made from wood and then it was gold covered. And that was an order from way up above. In fact, from God self. So we can actually even see that in the book of Exodus in the 25th chapter. That's one of those probably lesser known things. When Moses was up on the Mount Sinai for 40 days, one of the things that God talked to Moses about was basically how to build this Ark of the Covenant, this basically vehicle almost, right, to transport the stone tablets with the 10 Commandments in them. And he kind of gave Moses pretty specific instructions. It's got to be this long, yea wide, covered in gold, make it out of acacia wood, and so forth. And basically when Moses came down from the mountain, he said, okay, here's what we're going to do, and that's what they did, right? They built this kind of Ark of the Covenant, this vehicle to transport the stone tablets in. And so another thing that happened is basically there were always a couple of priests, I think 2, if not even 4, who were called upon to kind of transport the ark through the wilderness. And so it kind of marched along with the people of Israel, stayed in its separate tent. And it was pretty much, especially once they were gone from Mount Sinai, that was the place you would go to ask God for something. That was where God was the Ark of the Covenant. It had its own little tent. The ark, and that's where they went, and that's where they prayed, and you especially consulted with the ark or with God right before you went into some sort of battle, right? Because the wilderness wasn't always peaceful. So whenever they battled somebody, that's where they would go. And when they went into the Promised Land, this is a neat story. This is in the book of Joshua. They kind of walked into the Promised Land through the River Jordan, right? So they came like from the east and kind of moved through it. The ark was the first one to cross over, and as soon as the priests as soon as the feet of the priests touched the waters would kind of part, and kind of and basically the Jordan River was kind of split in half, so that the people of Israel could walk through on dry ground, just like the staff of Moses had earlier, split the Red Sea in half, so the people of Israel could escape from the Egyptian Pharaoh. just like God on the fourth day of creation, or on the third day it might have been, I forgot the exact day, right? But said, let there be land, and dry ground appeared from in the middle of the waters in Genesis 1. All of that, right, is kind of one and the same thing. God makes things happen, right? Dry land appears when God wants that to, and through divine action. So the ark plays a very important role here. And especially when the Israelites, right, when they kind of crossed into the promised land, the priests in the ark stood in the Jordan River that was now split in half all the way until the last Israelite had kind of crossed into it, and then they walked, past and behind everybody. So it was, it was the place of God, and it was also sort of your lucky charm. Every time the Ark of the Covenant was kind of with you in battle, chances were you were going to win because God was right there with you. And so until one day, basically, the Israelites got beaten pretty bad by the Philistines. And so they decided for the next battle, now we're going to take the ark with us. And what happened?
They won.
No. We wish, right? We would think so, but they didn't. They got beaten really, really bad. And the priests who took care of the ark were killed. 30,000 men of the Israelites were killed, and the Philistines stole the ark. That happened a few chapters before we started, basically in 1 Samuel 1. So that 1 Samuel 4, sorry. So that happened before David was alive or was king. And that was a rough time for them, obviously. So the Philistines kind of stole the ark, carried it into their own land. And that's kind of when the good track record of the ark starts, because kind of there it moved from town to town to town, and wherever the ark was, Philistines would get sick. I think a couple actually tried to peek into like what was inside, died on the spot. The others, tumors, plagues, rodents, stuff like that. So it was just horrible. They weren't even happy anymore when that thing showed up in their place, right? Because like every time it shows up at our place, we get sick and die, right? So what do they end up doing? A couple of chapters later, they build a cart, they put some oxen in front of it, they put the ark on it, and they chase the oxen off to the Israelites and send it back to them. And a couple of Philistines, they stayed behind and like looked and made sure that it actually made its way to the Israelites, and it did, and they died too. So it was, yes, really. That's actually what happened. That's actually what happened. So it was rough. It was tough going with the ark, and ever since then, it kind of stayed in a place called Kiryat Jearim. I think it comes up in our book as well. I think it's called Baal Judah today, but it probably was the same place where it was kind of taking care of people. Interestingly enough, it just kind of was parked there. And so, well, today we'll see how David is trying to pick that thing up and, carries the ark basically to him in Jerusalem.
So is there any explanation why all of a sudden it turned against them?
Against the Philistines or the Israelites?
No, against,
Israel?
yeah.
I'm not sure.
Why did they lose it?
Yeah. Right. Why did they lose it, and why did they lose the battle? I am not sure. I think one of the explanation is probably maybe because they just decided to do it on their own instead of consulting with God first. Yeah.
Somehow the people changed
Yeah.
something.
So that God was like, I'm not going to help you, but I'm sure not going to bless the Philistines either. So I think that was kind of the solution to, I think that's the answer to that question. All right, let's do 2 Samuel chapter 6. Can somebody read the first 11 verses for me?
David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. David and all the people with him set out and went forth from Baal Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord of hosts, who is enthroned on the cherubim. They carried the ark of God on a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were driving the new cart with the ark of God, and Ahio went in front of the ark. David and all the house of Israel were dancing before the Lord with all their might, with songs and lyres and harps, and tambourines and castanets and cymbals. When they came to the threshing floor of Nikon.
Yep. Just
Uzzah,
do it.
Uzzah
Just say it the way you want it.
to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen shook it. The anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God struck him there because he reached out his hand to the ark, and he died there beside the ark of God. David was angry because the Lord had burst forth with an outburst upon Uzzah. So that place is called Perez Uzzah. To this day, David was afraid of the Lord. To this day. David was afraid of the Lord that day. He said, "How can the ark of the Lord come into my care?" So David was unwilling to take the ark of the Lord into his care in the city of David. Instead, David took it to the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite. The ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom and the Gittite 3 months. And the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all his household.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Just say it with confidence.
Yes.
You just say it with confidence and go on.
Obed-Edom.
There you go. All right. Well,
Now, wait a
so,
minute.
are there any questions, first of all?
So I think he just lost favor. David?
David did?
Yeah. Did he just lose favor with the Lord?
I think David lost his patience with the Lord and his love.
Okay,
I think
makes
there is
sense.
something that David does not understand, and that is
Yeah.
how Uzzah is being treated.
Yeah.
That is definitely the part of these, because there's a bit more going on than just Uzzah, right, in these 11 verses, but Uzzah is definitely overshadowing it all, and this is probably one of the tougher ones, if not one of the toughest stories or parts of the stories in the entire Old Testament, right?
And he had to
I
be
mean-
a pretty important person, this Uzzah, because he was with the ark. I mean, so he must have been a friend of David, so I can understand why he'd get upset,
okay.
maybe,
Maybe.
that he...
It said he reached out his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it. Was this something he should not have
For
done?
the
The
oxen shook it.
but it was like he wanted to steady it.
Yeah, he
Mhm.
wanted to
Trying
make it...
to help.
But it
Yeah.
says,
Something he saw
Yeah.
was maybe going to go wrong, and
And
but
he
it
Uh-huh.
said,
Guilt.
but it says first that he reached out his hand, and then it says took hold of it for the oxen shook it. But
Yeah.
it sounds like he reached out his hand first.
Well, I thought only priests or what clergy were supposed to handle the ark,
Good
especially
point.
trained.
Yes. Yes.
They'd probably
Good
have to
po-
be
good point, Doug.
cleansed and purified.
So that is
Well,
the
there's
other
probably
question.
special handling. There's some scientific
Right, that makes sense.
hypothesis. When you layer insulators and conductors, it can form a capacitor, which can store electricity. And if they walk and if they're carrying it on poles to keep from getting shocked, and if they got some wool or something in there to help build up static, and you can pick up static from the air.
And there
And
sure
if
is
someone reaches out and grabs it, when it's got a charge,
Yeah.
they can get shocked and hurt or killed. And the priest may have had some special handling instructions, like maybe take a wet cord and drop it on it to just drain
Right.
the
Yeah.
charge of it before they open it up and look at the contents inside.
Yeah.
And this is all just hypothesis, it's not proven,
Yeah.
but we're trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
Well, for crying out loud, folks, I, out of everything I had expected for us to talk about in this moment, I did not think somebody would come up with even a remotely scientific explanation for this story. Thank you, Doc. This is amazing, America. Look at that. I was not ready for that. I think you hit on a lot of very good points. I actually wanted to talk
And it
about
would
Uzzah
be
at the
very
end of this.
dry there. Very
It-
humid.
it probably
The
would be.
static electricity would build up pretty fast.
It might have, yes. I think you hit on a lot of very important points. First of all, who is Uzzah? Who is Ahio, right? I always call him Ahio because it's like Ohio with an A.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I like to call him Ahio, but Ahio is also fine. It,
Yeah.
it might honestly be more original,
I went
right?
with yours when she was reading it.
Hey, Ohio.
Because you know, it's just Ohio. to
Yeah.
everybody.
There we go, right?
O-H-I-O.
But either way, right? Abinadab, Ahio, Uzzah, right? Like those are names we don't usually hear. I think Abinadab was one of David's sons too. This is a different guy, right?
Oh.
Yes, I think a couple of chapters ago, if I'm not mistaken. But either way, right, those are people we don't usually hear about in the rest of the story. They kind of just show up here and then they disappear again. So they're not like chief priests in David's kingdom or perhaps even big priests. We don't even hear if they're priests or not. We're kind of left to assume that because they took care of the ark, right? That's usually what
right
priests do, or it would be a priest's job, right? I mean,
Right.
You just don't give it to the carpenter across the street, like, hey, can you wash this ark? It's kind of important, right? Like, that's not what you do. So that is one big part. Yes, and another part is being ritually cleansed might be one explanation, or him not having been ritually cleansed to touch the ark of God, to basically touch God, so to speak, right? That would have been a big deal as well. I actually have a picture of the Ark of the Covenant, of what it might have looked like, and feel free to pass it along. Kind of, you will see two winged creatures kind of standing like that, bowed down.
Right.
Those would be the cherubim, yes.
Cherubim.
And it was imagined that God would be kind of either sitting or on top of those cherubim, or actually using those as a pedestal for his feet. So basically, God was invisibly throning right on top of them.
That's a very little version.
Exactly. That's a tabletopper version for Pastor, for Pastor Benjamin and Vandalia. Like, just so we know what it looked like. Yes.
I have another question. When they came to the threshing floor of Nacon,
Yep.
what is that?
So that
Threshing
is
floor.
apparently a place we're not quite sure where it is.
Okay.
So, but the important part is, right, I mean, we can even hear it. We can even hear it basically in this long version of the name of the Ark of the Covenant, right? That God is kind of right there. If I feel like Ark of the Covenant to our modern ears is a very long name for something to begin with, right? It's a fairly long name, but I guess the full name is the Ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord of Hosts, who is enthroned on the cherubim. Right? That's on verse 2. It sounds like a book from the 1700s, right?
Yeah, long title. Somebody's thesis.
Exactly, right? That tells you everything about it. So God is enthroned on the cherubim is kind of the point of the Ark of the Covenant. So this is literally God. And back then we need to understand, right? This thing was literally pure holiness.
Yeah.
I think nowadays we probably have in many respects lost our understanding and respect for holiness in that sense. And we don't imagine God to literally sit in and on something. We should as Lutherans, right? Because the sacrament, right? Communion. Mm-hmm. This is my body. This is my blood. I am in this. I am with this. I am somehow, in with and under, whatever we may call it, God is with it. But back then, it wasn't just something for us to snack on. God's presence was dangerous. God's presence, God was lethal. Kind of like the basilisks at Harry Potter, right? Like when you look at those big old snakes, you would die instantly. That was God back in the day too. The best, most gracious, most holy was also the most lethal. We were just too sinful, or we just, humankind and the divine. That was not a good thing to mix for us and for our sake. So whenever he touches it, whenever Uzzah touches the ark, he touches God. And he kind of, and that's also what ends him. Does that make sense? Just because he kind of touches God. Yes?
Well, I thought, kind of my theory is that you have to be pure to touch the ark. And if
That would be
something
one
impure,
explanation, yep.
That, you could get
Yep.
shocked or you could get cursed or whatever. And that may be what happened, why diseases and stuff followed, because impure people have possession of the holy item.
Okay.
And God doesn't like that.
Yeah.
He wants it with the proper people.
Well, yeah. So it really, I mean, there was a certain purity, right? Ritual purity, at least. And I mean, at this point, 1000 BC, we're not talking about sterile, right? It's
Yeah.
spiritually pure. Yes. And there were certain rituals, certain, religious rituals that you had to go through in order to be pure. Maybe Uzzah didn't do that. Maybe he did. We're not told, right? But we're kind of left to assume maybe he didn't. Maybe his impurity also lay in the fact that, like the Philistines brought back the Ark of the Covenant, right, to Israel, they put it on a cart with oxen in front of it, even though God had earlier told them, carry it, let your priests carry it. So maybe there was already the sin in that, that it wasn't even carried properly, but, God was carted off behind some oxen, basically, versus being ceremoniously, religiously kind of, walked,
Mistreated.
exactly, and carried from,
Carried and,
exactly, carried from A to B, from Kiryat Jearim to Jerusalem in this case, at least where it was initially planned. But whatever explanation we come up with here, right, we're not really given an answer. We can't really find it in these verses. It's just a lot is left unsaid here. But one thing we do know is for us, it's probably hard to wrestle with that image of God who just kind of shorthandedly kills a guy who tries to actually protect God and God's ark. Yeah.
Right.
And on the other hand, what we also see is we're not alone in being baffled about what's happening here, right? David is right amongst us. David too is kind of shocked. And David is actually even, and I don't know how often we see that in the Old Testament even, but even David is angry with God for this. Oftentimes it's the other way around, right? Because we humans, we just kind of do mess up, right?
To me, that's a big sin, to be angry at God.
Yes.
You can be angry at everything else. Well, maybe not everything, but there's a lot of things you can be angry about, but being angry at God, is wrong, big time in my book.
Okay. I look at things differently, to be very honest with you. And here's my reason why. I think there's a difference between being angry and sinning. For one, right? There's a way to say be angry but do not sin. It's also interesting, right? David doesn't suffer any consequences here whatsoever, right? And as we read down the chapter, we'll see David is going to stay fine, even though he's angry, right? And especially for Old Testament understandings, right? He might get punished by that.
That's what I thought. He
Yeah.
would be punished.
Yeah. What I believe with God, at least, what I believe about God is honestly also, God wants a relationship with us, right? And being angry with each other sometimes is a part of it. How you act on your anger, it's a completely different question, right? And we see it again and again, how people act out in their anger in ways that they shouldn't and probably become improper. I think there's a proper way for us to say, I am so angry with you right now. Without cussing them out, without getting physical, without destroying their belongings, without becoming improper, but to just say, listen, I am so angry with you right now, and here's why. Tell me just why did you do that or
God knows
whatever.
you're angry, whether you admit that
Yeah.
or say that. He
Yeah.
knows what you're feeling,
Yep.
and he knows that you're angry, and it's
Yep.
real. It's an emotion
Yep.
that he gave us. And
I think
knows
so.
whether or not you say, "Oh, I shouldn't be angry."
Yep.
God, he knows you are.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you may as well own it.
Yeah,
He knows.
I agree with you there, Tammy. I too think, anger is an emotion like any other. I don't like being angry,
I think it's the same emotion
but
that you have. Your children get angry at you sometimes. It doesn't mean that you
Yeah.
don't love them any more, anything else. You
Yeah.
understand why they're angry,
yeah,
and
Yeah.
they'll get over
And you
it.
help them learn to deal with that.
Yeah.
And they'll
Yeah.
get over
Yeah,
it.
and God will be with you through this anger and
Yeah.
get you to the other side and help you understand,
Yeah.
what you're angry about, why you're
Yeah.
angry, why it's that way, or
Yeah.
whatever
I
it
mean,
is.
I think there's
that
a
he
lot
does
of
with
people
you.
out there angry at God.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do agree.
Every day.
I do agree.
Because, why did my son have to die?
Right,
Why did
those
this?
kinds of things.
All those kind of
You're
things.
angry,
All-
sure
and
you are.
and they heal. They heal, or sometimes that can,
I think as long as they're angry, they're still with God,
yeah.
Right.
because
Can't be
otherwise
angry at
they
something you
haven't
don't
walked
believe
away
in.
and
They're
turned
still
their
talking
back.
to him, yeah.
Yes.
I mean,
they have a
it's-
connection.
But
Some-
it can take it too far.
There's some anger that I
Right.
think is constructive,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
like being angry at Adolf Hitler. It took
Yeah.
people to get angry at him in order to fight him, to conquer him, to stop the evil that he was doing, the Holocaust.
Right.
And it's like when I was smoking and I tried to quit and I failed, I got angry that I failed. And I kept on using that anger that each time I failed to make my next attempt that much more stronger. And eventually I did quit. So anger took part in me
Yeah,
quitting.
yeah.
Yes.
Anger can be a great motivator, right? Like,
Yes.
I'm going to show you, in a positive way, right? Like, you don't think I can do this? I'm going to show you, right? I think that's how the NFL works. All footballers, right? Like, it's good. Now he's got a chip on his shoulder. He's going to go out there. He's going to show us how good he can play, right? Like, that's the logic of, yes, exactly.
That extra edge.
Yeah,
Exactly,
But if
exactly.
that anger inspires you to be hateful towards God, then
Right.
you've crossed that
Exactly,
line. So where
exactly.
That's not appropriate.
Yep.
Yes.
And it's probably like it is with everything, right? We always kind of have a choice or options
Right.
on where we go from here, right? We can use it constructively.
Or you go the other.
Yes, exactly. And I know anger always makes us feel like, I know I'm like a cutoff person. When I'm angry, I don't want to talk to you. I want to see you. I want to go away. That's actually the wrong reaction. It's probably best to just go to the other person.
Yeah.
In honestly, in a mature and good relationship, I think between anybody, just two adults, two friends, husband and wife, mother and daughter, father and son, whatever, right? It would be best to just kind of go there and be like, look, I'm angry and here's why. And I don't understand why you did this, this, and this. And that is an option, right, and an open door for us to talk to each other about stuff.
Right.
And especially in family relations, that can be tough because they're so close to us. It's funny, right, with anger, like the closer we are to each other, the more it multiplies that emotion, right? And just, I mean, I don't know, I don't know if you remember that, but like when the Fukushima power plant exploded, do you remember those images in Japan? Like, because there was somebody filming it from the back, like from far a distance. And you could just literally just like see like a pressure wave, just like, just shoot up off of it right away. You can probably still find it on YouTube. That's what I'm always reminded
the
of.
tsunami hit, you mean? Is that the one?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, in 2010, I think it was, or 22, or 09, something like that. Because you could literally like see it blow up, like in the beginning.
Shock waves.
Yeah, it wasn't like a full-blown nuclear explosion. It wasn't Hiroshima, but it was just, you could just see some kind of pressure waves or some kind of explosion just go through it real quick. That's how I always feel when I'm really, really angry. Boom. That's the picture I probably see for a split second. And
Shock waves.
yes, exactly. Just being very angry, but at the same time, right? It's always also an invitation to work with us. Hey, Paul, we're at 2 Samuel chapter 6. If you want to grab a Bible or do something else,
Okay.
chapter 6 on 2 Samuel. Absolutely. So, yeah, it's anger is always a way for us to perhaps work with it, and I think especially when it comes to being angry with God, for the most part of my life, I probably thought like it's not okay to be angry with God, right? God loved me. God is gracious with me, right? God died for my sins. But I think a God who died for our sins and who went all the way for us, just to be in a good relationship with us and to rectify what was really messed up, can probably handle me being angry too. He could handle all the centurions, all the soldiers, all the bystanders mocking him on the cross. I think he can handle my anger, And the truth is, right, a lot of people are still angry, and a lot of people are angry with God, and as long as they're angry with God, right, they got to admit that there's a God, because you can't be angry at something that just doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, sometimes some people are just like, I think when you're angry for a certain amount of time and your maximum limit is reached, some people just kind of let it go, right? And it's like, you know what, I don't even care anymore. There's no God. There's no sense for me to be angry at him. That's also a choice that people can make, right? And either way, wherever people are in that journey, in that anger journey, in that church hurt journey, in that, this should not have happened and is not right journey, I think as Christians we also need to always rally alongside folks. And not necessarily tell them you shouldn't be angry at God because he did this, this, and this for you, but I think compassion is key in that sense. Because I believe if God were to rally alongside those people, God wouldn't be like, well, I so loved you in the world that I gave my only beloved son, right? God wouldn't probably Bible thump them, right? I think God would just almost lovingly embrace them and just kind of walk with them and be a gentle presence. And in a sense, we're called to be that too. Let's not start with the hug or the embrace. That would be awkward. But, I think it's important for us to kind of rally alongside them. For me as a pastor, as much as for all of you, I think, as Christian believers, whenever we get the chance to minister and to witness to folks like that, I think that's big. And to understand that there needs to be room for people to be angry at God sometimes, because, this life and this world just isn't fair. And
I don't understand why more people aren't angry with the God. That's
yeah,
what I said.
yeah.
There's so
That's
much,
true.
Things you have no control over, and
No.
bad things happen to good people.
They do.
Sometimes I catch self-proclaimed atheists
Mm-hmm,
using the Lord's name in vain, getting angry and you. I've got. If you really don't believe in him, why are you using his name?
Yeah.
And you're admitting that he has power that you don't.
Mm-hmm.
That is funny. Well, there's
Probably tend to disagree with you about that, but
Yeah.
knowing them,
Well, they'd have some explanation for
Yes,
it, I'm sure,
mhm.
yes.
it's just vernacular,
Yep.
just words. Doesn't
But-
mean anything to me.
either way, when we're going back to the story here, right? Even to the story of Uzzah, it sometimes also makes us wonder, like, even if we had the explanation, would it make us more comfortable, right? with this God who just kind of ends Uzzah just for trying to make things right. It is difficult. But either way, one other thing I thought was at least interesting, maybe apart from the Uzzah part, right, is 30,000 people, right, come up to Israel. Did I say that already?
Nope.
30,000, right,
I did.
are accompanying David as he carries out the ark, right? How many people did Israel lose when the Philistines stole the ark in that battle? 30,000, right? And just like the Philistines took back the ark, on a cart with oxen, so the ark is transported here ceremoniously on a cart that is led by oxen as well, right? It's almost like David picks up, and this is really powerful if we're thinking about it, right? David picks up a really bad and dark day in Israel's history and kind of turns it and spins it in its, on its head, and like uses those same things, but in a ceremonial manner. It's almost like he turns a minus into a plus, if that makes sense. Everything that's in bad memory, he turns it and makes it in, and turns it into a reason for a good memory, right? And for good remembrance here. Really impressive in the way actually that kind of happens. And concerning, Uzzah and Ohio and Abinadab, we don't really know who they were. We would assume they're priests, but we don't know. They might have been ordinary people like that.
Well, they were partying right before that. So.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah. That's right. But either way, right? Even David ends up being angry at God, right? Because it probably also made him pretty afraid of God when you see that, just right, like this ark has a lot of power. You touch it, you die. That's kind of crazy. And what do you do when you're the king and you're afraid of something and you're also angry at something? You put it on someone else's back, right? So
somebody else's house.
Exactly, and that's exactly what he does here, right? With Obed-Edom, the Gittite, who gets to keep it for a few months.
Yeah.
Yes. Perfect. So that's what happens there. All right. Can somebody read for us the next part? Let's do verses 12 through 19. Cool.
It was
Thank you,
told
Tammy.
King David, "The Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him because of the ark of God." So David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. And when those who bore the ark of the Lord had gone 6 paces, he sacrificed an ox and a fatling. David danced before the Lord with all his might. David was girded with a linen ephod.
Mm-hmm.
So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the trumpet. As the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, looked out of the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. They brought in the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David offered burnt offerings and offerings of well-being before the Lord. When David had finished offering the burnt offerings and the offerings of well-being, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts, and distributed food among all the people, the whole multitude of Israel, both men and women, to each a cake of bread, a portion of meat, and a cake of raisins. Then all the people went back to their homes.
Thank you, Tammy. Wonderful. Are there any questions these 7 verses kind of prompted in you? Anything that seemed a little weird?
Why did Michelle, like that?
Oh, Michael? Yes.
Yes, why did she despise him in her heart?
You know what, Claire? Keep that question in mind. We're going to get to that. Verses 20 through 23, we'll talk about that explicitly. So we'll get to that in a minute.
Did you notice after her name it said she was the daughter of Saul?
Probably
Yes.
part of that.
That might be part of it.
It might be part of that.
And wasn't
It
she
might very
given
well.
to somebody earlier? I mean,
Yes,
they
she
have her
was.
name earlier.
It seems to me we've heard her name.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we've heard her name. Actually, she had been given to David.
She was the first,
But
first
To love him.
Yes.
Yes,
he
exactly.
was the what?
She loved David.
Oh.
But we'll get to that later. Yes, it was in 1 Samuel 18.
Okay.
Exactly. When Saul had actually married it. Yes. But interestingly enough, right, the story starts out once again, or these verses obviously, they kind of pick up where we left off in the first 11 verses, right? Lo and behold, right, Obed-Edom had a good time with the ark.
Well, so I'll take it back.
Yeah, exactly.
getting
This
all
thing
the good
doesn't
luck.
just
I
kill.
got the good luck.
Exactly. This thing doesn't just curse, it blesses too, right? So what do you do when you're the king and you realize that the guy you gave the ark to because you were afraid of it is actually all of a sudden a blessing box? Well, you take it back, right? Exactly. And so the ceremonious part kind of begins, right? Now, I was always wondering, what are those 6 paces? It apparently is just 6 steps. So he just kind of took 6 steps, and all of a sudden we're already, at least he's bringing in offerings right away, right? Just to the Lord, basically. And the party kind of continues from there.
Yeah.
Yes. So really the text says David dances, right? So he must have kind of
What does that
turned up
look
all
like?
the...
Verse 14 says, David danced before the Lord with all his might. What does that look like?
Well, you know what? So it does say... Claire is laughing ambitiously. I think Claire... I think...
Because I think we went through all the ages where you've seen people dancing, and it's kind of
Oh,
like,
yeah.
okay.
So it sounds like he danced with all of his intensity, right?
Yeah.
I think there's a little bit more to it, and that again we will find proof for that at the end of the story. So I think an ephod ends around at the pelvic area. So I'm not sure if you still remember those days and how the pastors were dressed here, but in Lutheran circles right now we wear these white robes that go all the way down to our ankles. Back in still the 60s and 70s, I think we just kind of wore these black robes, I think, and we had like white surplices that kind of ended like right here. And ephod was, I think, a little bit like that, but it just kind of went all around the pelvic area. And since we don't hear what David is wearing apart from that, maybe he wasn't wearing anything apart from that. So maybe he was just kind of dressed in a mini skirt, sort of, so to speak. I'm sorry.
Dancing with all his might. Again,
And all his might.
What does that look like?
Exactly. So when David was dancing with all of his might, well, he was, all of his might was showing too.
Wasn't dressed, wasn't covered
Exactly.
too much.
Exactly. He wasn't covered appropriate in that. In our modern day understanding, it would have been an inappropriate way to dress.
And it was hot.
Yeah. But he sure would have gone to detention for that if he would have worn that as a high school student.
Yeah.
So either way, right? David is kind of dancing all the way and is really enjoying that. The other part is, it is interesting that David is wearing an ephod here, because that was really a priestly robe, and they probably wore more than just the ephod. Kind of like Lutheran pastors used to wear more than the white surplices. So David is kind of taking on a priestly role here altogether. He is dancing in front of the Ark of the Covenant, and he is also taking it into his kind of house or into his own area and custody, which also means he kind of becomes the patron of the Ark, which was also a priestly task. So this is pointing us to the fact that David is just he really acts as in the role of a priest as well. So this is not just a pious and righteous king who asks the Lord, for the Lord's blessing. It's not just a strong believer, but David also kind of is a priest. At least he acts as such, right? And even as a king here, he still kind of puts the Lord first. And actually, that whole dynamic kind of finds its biggest expression at the end of the verses here, at verse 19, when he distributed food to all the people. So you know how it is, right? Like different occasions, even in our days, right, have different kind of ways to go about. Like a wedding is not really a wedding without having a ceremony, and then without the ceremony, and even in the reception, right? Like it's pretty structured what you do, right? There's the speeches, then there's the dances, like the mother-son dance, exactly, cutting the cake, right? All of that is important. Back then, right, or our worship services, right? Tomorrow we're gonna have Lenten worship over at Brookville. That's gonna look different than our Sunday morning worship services, right? Because we're not going to be doing, the sacrament, right? We're not going to have communion. Exactly, we're not going to be communing. It's just going to be kind of a service of the Word, which we kind of specially put together for this occasion too. But you can tell the difference between the two. This is not just like any other worship procession, but it's like when people were given food to eat, like when everybody got their meals and their bread and everything, that usually only happened when you had a new king that would be enthroned in the city, basically, of Jerusalem, or in the capital city. So what that actually says is, if we have the Ark of the Covenant coming in here, and they treat it as if a new king was enthroned, than the ark, right? And God is
Was
sort of
bigger
enthroned
than
in.
him.
Exactly,
That's bigger than
exactly. So even as King David is king, right? He's not like, I'm the king and here's God, look what I brought. But he's still like, hey, God is still first, right? At least that's kind of David kind of pointing to the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the difference is, though, perhaps we need to mention that too, right? David is not just a little shepherd boy anymore, right? From backwater Bethlehem. And he is not just a weak little guy who's trying to find some favor for the Lord, maybe trying to win a battle against a mighty enemy. Right now, David is kind of the superpower, right? At least he's a pretty big power in his very area, in his very situation, right? He's the biggest man on campus right now, in front of all of his servants. So, is David being sincere and genuine here, or is he being a sly little fox? Is he perhaps trying to kind of use this almost as a political symbol, just in a cunning way almost? Maybe that's a question we can ask too. Maybe in a way to kind of legitimize his own power, if that makes sense. To kind of say, hey, I'm following the Lord, even though maybe in his heart things looked a little different.
So what you're saying is he's headed for trouble.
Potentially, and even especially in just going forward in the chapters to follow, it might be also a helpful way to kind of legitimize, kind of his own power and strengthen himself in a way, and to kind of set that up. Wasn't always easy even in King David's day, even though that's the good old days for Israel, right? Always, hey. We wish we were like King David again, right? We wish we had that big old Israel again. We were united and strong. That's what we're going to hear lamented throughout the rest of the Old Testament, right? But it wasn't always easy for him. And he was going to, I don't even think we're going to do this, because it's just, David it's just an epos. It would just take too much time, I think, for a Bible study, or at least for our formative Bible studies to go through. But one of his sons, Absalom, is going to try to take him out, and he's going to have to flee Jerusalem again. In those days it might come good as well to see, hey, you know what, you were the guy who brought God, and you were the God-obedient king here, not your son, that entitled little prat,
Yeah, when they're good. When your parents are powerful, you always turn out rotten.
Yeah, there you go.
No,
There you go.
do have a choice, but they choose the wrong way most of the time.
And I guess what I'm also trying to say is, there's always a thin line, right? When a leader and a ruler is using religious powers and says, here I am, the humble servant of God. Well, maybe you are, but on the other hand, you're going to have, you hold a lot of power in your hands. And, all I'm saying, I guess, is a lot of powerful rulers have claimed they're fulfilling the will of God, and God spoke to them this and that and the third. And then they just kind of go off and say, I don't know, do something that exactly,
Absolute power.
Exactly. So, at least there's an interesting light, or it would be an interesting angle to look at the story at the very least. I guess is is also what I'm trying to say.
What was David's life like? Like a day-to-day kind of thing. Do we know? Did he live a life of luxury where they brought breakfast to him in bed and he, had this leisurely life, or was it always meeting because you had to take care of the troops and this and that?
Yeah.
And so it was very busy and demanding.
I'm not sure how much we even hear of that.
I don't think we
do.
Any of that day-to-day stuff. And I just kind of wonder, because we think of a king as living in luxury. We talk about the palace that he came from and that sort of thing. But
I wouldn't want to be
so
one for anything.
busy protecting his power.
Yeah.
And that I don't know that it's that life that we picture now as a king. Having luxury all around him and servants fanning him and all this kind of stuff that we picture from movies and
That's true. That's true.
You just wonder.
Yeah.
What his day-to-day.
That's where the time machine I talk about goes in.
See? We need to
Oh yeah.
We need to go back in
those
time.
kinds of details.
Check it out.
Here.
Always wanted
Oh, how I wish I could do that too, Mary. I join you in that, right?
Well, when you think about, you're hearing so much about what's going on with like the Queen in England now. And I can remember when she got crowned. I got to stay home from school and watch it on TV.
Really?
I did.
What?
We were just starting to get TV in our area because we were down in the valley, so we had to have cable put in. And my girlfriend got it before we did, and my mother let me stay home from school that day, and we watched her coronation.
Oh,
Yes.
wow.
Yeah, tells how old I am. And, anyway, though, you know, and so like, at that time, television was very new, so girls were always enthralled with princesses
Oh,
and
yeah.
queens and
Well,
things,
they always
you know?
are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's been interesting to watch her grow up for me, and now to see all the changes,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and what they go through is not near the pressure of what these people wouldn't have, because
Oh, yeah.
they don't really run the government.
Oh yeah.
Right,
You
right.
know, well, where these people did all those things, it had to be a really
I mean, he was,
enormous responsibility type thing,
It-
just
it
like
was.
you're saying. You
It
know,
was.
trying
he was
to-
the justice too. I never even really
Yeah.
thought about that till now. He was
Probably.
represented justice, anything rules, laws, anything that had to be decided.
Yep.
he
And I mean,
had to
And
as
decide it.
commander in chief, you still had to go into battle, right? Like
Right,
of
because
his
no
little
matter
army, it wasn't.
what you won, there were
Yeah.
still others brewing.
Right.
They
Oh,
were-
you
they were
bet.
constantly
You bet.
going on.
Always, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
So that had to be a awesome
Oh yeah, yeah.
type of thing.
So, yeah, it wasn't just luxury, right?
Right.
It
It's not
wasn't
what
like the
we
queen.
see.
Yeah.
It was a whole different.
Well, it probably wasn't always luxury, because if
No.
he's going out to the battlefront sometimes.
Exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
there's gonna be primitive conditions out there probably.
Oh yeah.
Right.
And,
Even though
luxury
he's the
back
king,
then
Mm-hmm.
Right.
was,
Yeah,
you
it'd
know,
still
we
be the
probably
luxury
live
of the
better,
day.
we
Yeah.
probably have a better, more luxury than
By
the
far.
king had. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Probably usually, they had real good baths though. At least that's what they always say. They always had baths.
When you're out in battle, though, just to even have food had to be a big.
Probably. It's always been a challenge, I'm sure. Yeah.
Well, if you're in a in an area and you're taking baths, that is almost bragging right there.
Yes.
That's true too.
So that's the
That is
Hanging
true.
Gardens of Babylon. Yeah, they were
Yeah.
bragging.
All right. Can somebody read for me the last 4 verses, 20 through 23? Claire has a question about it. Let's get to it.
Yes, 23, okay. David returned to bless his household, but Michal, or
Right.
whatever her
fine.
name is.
Whatever.
Yes, the daughter of Saul came out to meet David and said, "How the king of Israel honored himself today, uncovering himself today before the eyes of," I'm sorry, I can't see very well. "The eyes of his servants, maids, as any vulgar fellow might shamelessly uncover himself. David said to her, 'It was before the Lord who chose me in place of your father and all his household to appoint me as prince over Israel. The people of the Lord that I have danced before the Lord will make myself yet more contemptible than this, and I will be abased in my own eyes. But by the maids of whom you have spoken, by them I shall be held in honor." And Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child to the day of her death.
Wow. Wow. Kind
So
of.
she was wrong.
Well, yes. So
what
it-
does that mean? That
Okay.
she never married, but she married first.
she married.
She married
yes.
David.
So
No,
let's.
she didn't marry David.
Yeah.
So
yes,
let's-
married
mhm.
David.
Oh, I
let-
thought
let-
she married her. I thought that was who he was going to marry, but then Saul gave her to somebody else.
Good point. Yes. So let's talk about Michal again, right? So she
Okay.
first showed up, I think, 3 weeks ago when we talked about 1 Samuel 18, right? When Jonathan still loved David and everybody loved David,
Right.
and it was in that same chapter where David dodged kind of Saul's spears twice while he was playing the harp. Remember that? And either way, at the end of it, I think it said Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David.
Yeah.
And Saul, her father, agreed to marry Michal to David in return for a bride price, I think, of 200 Philistine foreskins. So he had to kill 200 of the Philistines in order to get Michal, and that's what he did, right? And I don't know if you remember it, but it said, while Michal really loved David, David was kind of like, oh, it sure would be good, right, to be married into Saul's household,
Just
like,
political.
into the household of the king, right?
I
David
thought he was trying to avoid it though, there for a while.
he I'm not sure, but he definitely appeared cold in that chapter.
Yes.
In terms of, just his response wasn't like, oh, Michal is such a wonderful woman. It wasn't about Michal at all. It was kind of like, it would be great to be part of Saul's, to be part of the household of my king, to be married into that family. How honorable would that be, right? So that's, and that's kind of what happened. But you're right? Like shortly after, David had started to, was kind of running away. He was a fugitive. He was a fugitive from Saul, right? And Michal had even at some point helped him escape. She kind of let down the bed sheets down the window so he could kind of like move down, to run away from Saul. But while David was gone for that long time, Saul took Michal and married her to somebody else. Exactly. And I think his name is Palti. It's a Palti, another guy. We read about that as well, right? So after David became powerful, after Saul died, and when Abner, do you remember Abner? Mm-hmm. When he, Saul's general, when he kind of had deserted and kind of came over to David's camp, part of the deal for David to accept Abner back was to give Michal to him. So he was like, okay, I can accept you in my camp, right? Like Abner, you can work for me, but I want Michal back. Bring her back to me. And so she was taken. We don't know how forceful it was, but she had to move back from Palti back to David's household, so to speak. And actually what it says is, and this is in 2 Samuel chapter 3, that Palti was kind of walking with Michal, or he was kind of running behind Michal pretty much all the way, and he was crying. So clearly Palti's heart was probably broken, right? If nothing else, it probably was, it was hard for Palti. So here we have Michal coming back. We don't really know how, or I don't know, I don't think it's said how Michal felt about the whole situation. But clearly what we see here is not this young, in love with David woman anymore. It's not this young romantic relationship that we have anymore. We have more, a relationship that's probably older and probably also drifted apart pretty far by now. That's really kind of showing up here. And we're not sure exactly what the despised in his heart really means. That too is kind of left open in the end. But what we do see is, right, she's pretty mad at him for pretty much, for really up to 3 reasons, right? Mm-hmm. One of them being, obviously he exposed himself, just wearing nothing but an ephod and dancing around.
You have enough clothes.
Yeah, I asked what
exactly,
that looked like.
Exactly.
We found out here. Yeah.
Yeah. And apparently he did so in front of the slaves of his servants. So basically in front of, which was back then probably a completely different tier of society, right? Like the lower socioeconomic class as a slave of,
servants, maids.
Exactly. That's what my translation reads, but it basically amounts to those were the slave women of David's servants, right? That was absolutely no way to be for Michal. And
I don't still really understand how everybody.
And basically, he kind of behaved like the last drunk in the pub, just absolutely not king-like, right? At all.
Wait till you see this tomorrow morning.
Exactly.
It was before the Lord.
Yeah.
So he was saying, I was doing it before the Lord.
Yeah.
Who chose me in place of your father
Mm-hmm.
and all of the household to appoint me as prince over Israel. That I have danced before the Lord. So it's just I'm doing it for the Lord.
Yes, exactly. That's what David says. But honey, I did it for the Lord. I humbled myself before God, right? So
He goes, no, I don't think that's what you're doing.
Exactly. That's kind of not what she's doing, right? Or what he did. At least that's kind of what we're left to feel like.
Yeah.
But yes, in the whole, but this is more than just a dialogue, right? This is more than just a one-on-one conversation directly quoted from between David and Michal, right? We have that commentator too, right? Who always introduces her, and I think that's really important, right? He always says, but Michal, Saul's daughter, not David's wife, but Saul's daughter, right? It's very important that she comes from Saul, and that the bloodlines of Saul and David never really mixed. There is no child here that can claim both. That can say, well, I am the son of David, but I'm also the grandson of Saul. No, this is the
Lord was really angry at Saul.
I guess so, yeah. Or or at least the commentator really needs, or whoever wrote this down really wanted us to know, hey, you know,
Yeah.
David and Saul did not make Saul ended with Saul. Like that's where the house of Saul ended, really. And clearly, Michal also comes across as being, you know, more the person of like Saul's household, so to speak, right? Of his royal.
You want her back.
Yeah.
And you know what? That might have just been power play.
Oh, true.
You know, as king, it probably doesn't look so good if you once had a woman who's now, you know, a wife who's now with somebody else. Especially back in those days when you had a harem full of women, right, and
Right.
wives. I think it might have been power play in a way.
And she loved him so much.
And she had loved him once upon a time, right? But that's also
Then
the.
he had her back and he didn't even
Respect
acknowledge
her.
her like it.
Didn't
We don't
respect
know.
her at all.
We don't
Well,
know,
it
right?
sounded like it.
It sounded like it, yeah.
And it sounds like the second husband
think
in
you're
there
right, it's
really
a
loved
power
her, and
play.
maybe he was really
Right.
good to her, and so now she's got to go back to this guy who really doesn't
Yeah,
care
exactly. It's like, oh, I have 10 others now.
Wow,
She's
I like
living with some disappointment, I'm thinking.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
poor girl. Yeah,
Over those
she's
years.
definitely living with some disappointment. I mean, I think all women lived with disappointment in those days.
Probably,
They had no
probably
control
so.
over their lives at all.
Her
Yeah.
dad is gone, and somebody
Well.
is still able to give her to somebody else.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's not her dad.
I
You know,
know.
some other man can give her, decide, yeah, you're going here, and
Yeah.
Take her away from her
Yeah.
husband she might have had children with.
yeah.
Yep.
Who the heck knows?
Yep. And the other sad thing is, right, she's always an object basically in power play, right?
Yeah.
She married 3 times, and 3 times it was for more or less for political reasons or for powerful reasons, right? For Saul because he acknowledged David's reign, and because he basically Saul had to keep a promise, right? Because he had thought initially, I think, that David wasn't going to make it. 200 Philistines? No. You're not going to kill 200 folks of a superior army to you, right? That's kind of like what David will later do to Bathsheba's husband, right? I forgot his name right now. But either way, right? Like Uriah. I thought it was Uriah, yeah. But,
it's
you know,
Uriah.
that's the same thing that David will do to him, right? Like, just go into battle. Go into another battle. I'll just put you first row. You're not going to come back. Bam.
Then I can have
That's
your
what
wife.
Saul did initially, right? And then it was like, oh, oops, he survived. Well, I guess I got to give you his wife, right? Then David is gone. Boom, next husband, right? Like, I want to be friends with him now. Michal, marry this guy, right? And then David comes back and is like, hey, you're coming back to me, right? It was never about her feelings. It was never about their feelings, really.
Right.
I mean, Palti might have fallen in love with her. He may have. He may have also just been like, oh man,
Oh,
you know,
I'm losing that.
exactly that prestige that comes with marrying a princess. It might have even been that, right?
And
Yeah,
about his own, what was going on
Yeah,
with him.
exactly.
Was his, whoa.
Yeah. But either way, right? We have a woman here who once upon a time was a symbol of love, more so than all the other women in the Old Testament, really, because she was the one who really loved him
She says
and who got her will, right? And she ends up being just an object of power play and without children, which back then was no fun at all. I mean, it's just absolutely no fun. And the crazy part is, right, she's in a relationship with David, who I guess all he has is thanks to the love God had for him, right, and to the election he had for him. So in a way, this is also, it's almost like Michal must have been looking forward for David to get his butt whooped at some point somewhere, right? So the whole Bathsheba incident probably just, it almost anticipates that David and his power, and perhaps also his self-centeredness or his focus on power in a way, more or less, right? That he kind of falls flat on his face in that regard as well. Yeah, it's kind of a sad story, and it's sad to hear that she remains childless, but it's...
Yeah, her life was just horrible. It just sounds like her had just this
Yeah.
horrible
Yeah.
life of disappointment
Yeah,
and people making decisions for her, and that's
Yeah.
terrible.
Yeah. And it
Well, it's
hasn't.
still that way in parts of the world.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
I
oh,
know.
yeah. Oh,
It
yeah.
still
Sure it
is.
is.
India is horrible about that kind of stuff. At least in
And,
the
yeah.
lower.
Yeah.
and yeah, and hey, who knows, right? Where there's probably a lot more countries, you
Right,
know,
that would
where
be
it's more or less
Africa,
still
yeah.
happening. I have no idea where, but
China,
might be.
Japan,
Yeah.
maybe. I don't know. Maybe Japan is
In
not so much.
certain
Yeah.
sections.
Jeez.
Yeah. So either way, just I think that's Michal's story, and there's perhaps
It's a
even
good
more ways
ending.
to look at it. Yeah. It's a sad ending, right? But
It's just too
but
bad.
it's
Sad ending,
Yep.
yeah, it's a-
yep. Well, next chapter will be better. Next week we're going to come back here and we're going to read chapter 7.
Okay.
God's covenant with David. It's going to be a completely different note than the one we ended on today.
Okay.
Either way, are there any other questions, any other comments, anything else you have on your heart? Well, if not, I thank you for coming today.